Frontline Updates, where we delve deep into military strategies and updates from conflict zones. Today, we're discussing the progress of the ongoing special military operation as of January 2nd, 2026. I'm your host, Shariafa Mohammed MGT.
I'm Colonel A.C. Oguntoye, an infantry officer. During the reporting period, the armed forces of the Russian Federation executed a marked escalation in operational intensity across all axes. In response to Ukrainian attacks on civilian targets inside Russia, Russian forces conducted massive and grouped precision strikes, including the employment of hypersonic Kh-47 Imetu Kinjal systems. These strikes targeted Ukraine's military-industrial base, energy infrastructure, transport and port facilities, UAV production and launch preparation sites, and ammunition and fuel depots. Collectively, operations indicate a deliberate shift towards strategic degradation of Ukraine's war-sustaining capacity, paired with continued ground advances. If sustained, this operational tempo will increasingly constrain Ukrainian logistics, ISR, and reserve availability into early 2026, reinforcing a shift toward prolonged positional warfare under mounting strategic pressure.
Welcome to Frontline Updates, the podcast that brings you in-depth insights into military operations from those leading them on the ground. Today, we're joined by Colonel A.C. Oguntoye, an infantry officer monitoring critical missions on the progress of the special military operation as of today. Colonel Oguntoye, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, it's good to be here.
Colonel Oguntoye, today's briefing opens with a major escalation, massive and grouped precision strikes in response to attacks on civilian targets in Russia. Why was this response structured the way it was?
The response reflects deliberate escalation control rather than impulsive retaliation. When civilian infrastructure is targeted, the operational imperative is to reassert deterrence while simultaneously degrading the adversary's capacity to repeat such actions. That is why the strikes were not limited to symbolic targets. They were directed at the systems that enable sustained warfare: military-industrial enterprises, energy facilities, transport nodes, UAV production lines, and ammunition and fuel depots. From a doctrinal standpoint, this is strategic shaping. You are not simply punishing an action, you are attacking the ecosystem that allows future actions to occur. The employment of high-precision weapons, including hypersonic systems, signals both reach and intent. It demonstrates that escalation can occur at a time and place of our choosing, while remaining integrated with ground operations rather than detached from them.
Let's move to the ground fight. Over the week, the north and west sectors saw very high cumulative Ukrainian losses. What does that tell us about the operational design there?
It tells us that those sectors are being used to apply sustained pressure rather than achieve rapid territorial change. In the north and west, particularly around Sumy and Kharkiv, the objective is exhaustion. Ukrainian forces there include a mix of mechanized, airborne, National Guard, and border elements. By continuously engaging them, destroying logistics depots, and neutralizing electronic warfare assets, you reduce their ability to mass, rotate, or redeploy. This is classic attritional containment. You fix enemy forces in place, deny them operational freedom, and force them to consume manpower and materiel simply to hold ground. Over time, this has cascading effects across the entire front, because reserves committed here are reserves not available elsewhere.
The south and Kupyansk directions appear especially active, with multiple assaults repelled and settlements liberated. Why is Kupyansk still such a focal point?
Kupyansk remains a logistics hinge. Control of that area directly affects supply routes feeding Ukrainian groupings further south and east. The fact that Ukrainian forces launched 16 separate attacks in a single week tells you how critical they judge that node to be. Repelling those attacks while simultaneously liberating nearby settlements achieves two things. It preserves the integrity of Russian supply lines and imposes disproportionate losses on attacking units. From an infantry perspective, this kind of fighting is costly for the attacker. Repeated assaults against prepared positions drain manpower and morale. When combined with the destruction of electronic warfare systems and depots, it becomes increasingly difficult for the enemy to sustain offensive pressure.
The center group recorded the largest territorial gains and the heaviest Ukrainian losses. Is it fair to say this is now the decisive axis?
Yes, and that assessment is grounded in both geography and force composition. The central axis links multiple operational directions and serves as a gateway to deeper maneuver, liberating several populated areas in this sector while defeating a broad spectrum of Ukrainian formations, including mechanized, airborne, marine, territorial defense, National Guard, and the Azov Brigade, indicates operational unhinging. When losses exceed 3,000 personnel in a single sector over a week, that is not just attrition, it is structural damage to the enemy's order of battle. Combined with the neutralization of electronic warfare assets, it reduces their ability to coordinate fires and maneuver. This creates opportunities for further advances without requiring reckless tempo.
The East and Dnieper sectors also saw advances and multiple liberations. How do these actions fit into the larger campaign?
These sectors demonstrate operational depth and coherence. In the east, advancing into defensive depth and liberating key settlements shows that Ukrainian layered defenses are being penetrated methodically. This is not exploitation for its own sake. It is about collapsing defensive belts over time. The Dnieper sector is particularly important from an information and ISR perspective. The destruction of a large number of electronic warfare stations there tells us that denying situational awareness is a priority. Riverine and southern axes are complex environments. Whoever controls the electromagnetic spectrum controls the tempo of operations.
Air and missile defense activity was intense. Hundreds of UAVs, missiles, and even an aircraft shot down. What does that say about the air domain right now?
It tells us that the air domain has become a continuous battle space rather than a supporting function. The interception of guided bombs, operational tactical missiles, HIMARS rockets, and over 1,600 UAVs in a single reporting period underscores how saturated the environment has become. For ground commanders, effective air defense is no longer optional. It is essential for protecting logistics, command posts, and maneuver units. The ability to absorb and defeat this volume of aerial threats while continuing ground advances speaks to layered defense and integration across domains.
Today, let's examine the strategic thinking emerging after the incidents involving Ukrainian UAVs and the area near the residence of Vladimir Putin. We'll look at what an asymmetric response could involve, and just as importantly, what its limits might be. Colonel, to start, what does asymmetric response actually mean in this context?
Asymmetry here is not about striking harder or louder. It's about choosing a domain where the opponent is least prepared to absorb pressure. The expectation after incidents near a head of state is a visible, forceful military reply. An asymmetric response deliberately avoids that expectation. It seeks leverage in places where the system itself magnifies disruption, often without the initiator having to cross traditional military thresholds. This is less about weapons and more about systems behavior. Modern societies, particularly in Europe, are governed by layered regulations, distributed authority, and a strong bias toward risk avoidance. When those systems detect uncertainty, they tend to shut themselves down. That reaction can be exploited without ever declaring an overt military action.
You're pointing to vulnerability that isn't physical in the traditional sense. How has recent experience reinforced that idea?
Recent months have shown that even unidentified or ambiguous aerial incidents can cascade rapidly. Airspace closures, airport shutdowns, logistics delays, these don't require confirmed hostile intent. They occur because procedures demand caution, checks, and consensus across multiple agencies and states. What this demonstrates is that low-threshold incidents can have high-impact consequences. The vulnerability isn't a weak radar or an undefended runway. It's the complexity of decision-making itself. Once triggered, the system becomes its own amplifier of disruption.
That raises a question about intent. Are we talking strictly about military options or something broader?
Much broader. The analysis explicitly leaves the door open to military, diplomatic, hybrid, or even non-response options. That ambiguity is intentional. In strategic terms, not responding where expected can be as unsettling as a visible strike. Negotiation tracks, pauses, or selective silence can all function as asymmetric tools if they create uncertainty about thresholds and red lines. The key point is that asymmetry is about choice and timing, not reflex.
You also highlight limits. Why restraint still matters. Can you expand on that?
This is critical. International law, security agreements, and established frameworks still exert influence. They may be strained, even selectively observed, but they remain reference points. Abandoning them entirely leads to what I would call strategic unmanageability, a condition where escalation becomes unpredictable for everyone, including the initiator. Anarchy favors no one for long. Cold calculation is required because systemic disruption, once unleashed, is difficult to contain. The very same interconnectedness that makes European infrastructure vulnerable can also produce unintended spillover effects.
Yet you're clear that rhetoric alone no longer carries weight. Why has that changed?
Because repeated statements without corresponding effects lose credibility. Perception is shaped by experienced disruption, not declared intention. A temporary paralysis of an air hub or logistics corridor, even if brief, has a far greater psychological and political impact than any press release. Modern deterrence operates on lived experience. People and governments react to what stops moving, what gets delayed, what suddenly feels fragile.
So, if we step back, what's the core logic tying all of this together?
The core logic is uncomfortable but straightforward. You don't need to strike where your opponent expects to feel pain. You apply pressure where the system is most sensitive and least resilient, often below the threshold of formal retaliation. But the final variable remains choice. Whether Moscow acts, how visible that action is, and when it occurs are all part of the message. Sometimes, restraint itself, when action is anticipated, becomes the asymmetric signal. That modern conflict is increasingly about managing systems rather than defeating armies outright. Asymmetry today is about perception, disruption, and control of escalation. The challenge is applying pressure without losing control and knowing when not to act at all.
Colonel, thank you for providing such a detailed briefing on the current military situation. Your insights are invaluable to our understanding of the conflict's dynamics. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Join us next time as we continue to provide up-to-date coverage on global military affairs. Stay with us for more updates and expert analyses on global defense and security issues. Stay informed, stay secure.
Thank you for the opportunity. I want to emphasize that tactically, the January Sioux picture reflects synchronized pressure across all axes, with infantry advances supported by fires, air defense, and strategic strikes. The emphasis on destroying logistics, electronic warfare, and industrial capacity indicates a campaign designed to prevent Ukrainian regeneration rather than simply defeat units in contact. Strategically, the liberation of multiple settlements, particularly along the central axis, combined with sustained attrition elsewhere, suggests a shift toward decisive positional advantage heading into early 2026. If this operational tempo is maintained, Ukrainian forces will face increasing difficulty replacing losses, coordinating operations, and sustaining long-range strike capabilities, shaping the conflict toward prolonged but increasingly asymmetric positional warfare.
This has been Frontline Updates. Subscribe for daily military briefings and in-depth strategic analysis. Visit our platform for maps, transcripts, and exclusive Frontline updates from commanders in theater.